hope this finds you well. The past few days certainly didn't find me well, because I was feeling a little bit under the weather, which affected my voice so much so that I had very little to no hope of dropping another one of these. So for anyone who's been enjoying these reviews so far, I'm so sorry for that, but now we are back at it, fortunately. This time we're gonna do something a little bit different. Instead of promoting the usual indie comic, I am going to pick a classic novella from Korean literature, kind of partially inspired by a class that I recently took in the subject. But what'll be common for the previous cases is that, as usually, we will be discussing somebody who I've actually met in real life, rather a translator of it, whom we will get to in a little bit. Our author in discussion this time is this Korean intellectual slash journalist slash author by the name of Pensir. For my Koreans out there, excuse me for potentially botching that pronunciation. This individual lived in the colonial period of Korea, and they did most of their works in the late 30s and early 1940s, while Korea was still under imperial rule by the Japanese Empire. The work from Pensir in particular that we're gonna be discussing is titled Sinner of the People. And the main person in charge of making the text a little more accessible for us non-Korean speakers is none other than Professor Young Kim, who was actually an instructor of mine at my college while I was working on my BA program. So should you ever go to Queens College in New York City, please do check out her work. She has some very good material in her courses in addition to Sinner of the People. Anyways, moving on to the main plot of the story. So, Sinner of the People follows this Korean colonial subject whose name is never mentioned, but I'm presuming he works as a narrator who's telling all the events as well as the thoughts of some of his fellow ventures in the plot throughout the story. And it's also providing at least one point of view of what it may have been like to struggle under Japanese rule in Korea in mostly the early 1940s. So to give you guys a quick sort of overview of it, the main character is somebody who's at least starts off as a pro-Japanese journalist who writes articles accordingly for a publishing house by the name of P Publishing. He frequently works with one of his closest colleagues by the name of Yun, who on the other hand is very much against the Japanese occupation in Korea. So the main character is also a farmer dealing with a hunger crisis that the same forces mentioned before are mainly responsible. The fact that he is a colonial subject in the early 1940s Korea gets introduced in the very early pages of the text through a scene where the civilians get evacuated due to a bomb threat that they're suspecting by the United States. I guess at this point I should mention that the US forces also had a large influence over all of the Orients actually at the time. All of those nations like your China, Korea, and Japan were at the same time having all this political strife with each other. But that's a whole nother story that I'm sure would make its own podcast, so we're not gonna get into that this time. The main character is also a little bit of a intellectual, which is why he gets invited to a lecturing tour. Also not too far into the story, there he meets some younglings that are actually sympathizing with the liberation movement of Korea. And the main character gets pretty impressed by these younglings who want to start fighting for liberation. But kind of interestingly, he's being torn between two extremes in terms of political views, because on one hand he truly seems to sympathize for the liberation, as a lot of people probably did at the time, but at the same time it's kind of inappropriate to openly promote those kind of views, because the individual at the time would become what we would nowadays call cancelled. But unlike simply having your social media platform taken down or you losing your job as a TV persona or whatever for a broadcasting company, in this case in colonial Korea you could get either ostracized by your workplace, in other words like losing your job, especially if you were some sort of a journalist or any other kind of communications professional, and you would most likely never be welcomed back. And you would also go through a series of interrogations through the police, almost as if you're being suspected for a severe crime. And if you're kind of found guilty, whether or not it's actually true, you could get imprisoned and confined indefinitely and kept in hunger to the point where you could become quite literally nothing but skin and bones. And that actually becomes one of the, in my mind, most emotionally charged scenes in the text, because one of the main characters' friends gets imprisoned, and when he goes down to the police station to inquire about them, to his surprise, he gets interrogated by police first before getting any kind of information on these buddies of his. And all it took really was for him to say something along the lines of like, nah man, I didn't really do that. Like, if you interpreted it that way, yeah, that's a damn shame. And you know, this police officer becomes so offended by that remark that he just goes like, you need to go hungry for a little while, like how dare you, and he just gets confined just like that for a good little while. And personally, this is the point of the story where I became seriously like sucked in to the story, and like to the point where it became like one of those really effortlessly flowing reading experiences, partially due to the fact that the kind of setting of a prison in just about any kind of story is very much up my alley. That's kind of why I chose that as the main setting for my main graphic novel series, Day with Hope, right now, which I'll also probably talk more on in another video. Point being is that I very much like prison as a setting for any kind of story that I consume, because you got the aspect of being both mentally and physically confined in a space and struggling to kind of remain your humanity and insanity while you're in there, due to the obvious confinement and the authorities that are constantly lurking over you and your fellow prisoners, which I cannot help but to find as, in a nutshell, really interesting social commentary, because that has a lot of parallels to like many of us in the real world, like whether you're actually physically confined somewhere or not, there seem to always be these forces lurking somewhere in the shadows that are kind of controlling us mentally and putting us behind these bars that are often invisible, and we're kind of stuck in there dealing with our fellow inmates, the authorities who are right there visible, as well as our own headspace with seemingly very little to no avenues of escape. But kind of interestingly, unlike me, this main character in Sinner of the People doesn't get burdened down by any of these thoughts of mine that I mentioned, and instead he kind of interestingly remains pretty humble throughout most of that experience. Like, he decides to fast most of the time and just simply comply with the jail guards over there, and he even goes so far as to say, quote, "I used to spend each day doing nothing but waiting for the next meal. When I thought about myself, I was extremely frivolous. I was no different from a pig that was greedy for food all day long," unquote. with this, he kind of goes through a very deep self-reflection. Maybe partially or probably mainly because, I mean, not that I have some personal experience, but I would imagine that that's how it is when you're sitting in a jail cell for days, months, or even years at a time, that there's not a whole lot else to do but to potentially fight off your unruly fellow inmates, or if you get lucky enough to not have to do all of that, you just sit there and deeply contemplate your life right there and moving forward once you eventually get out of that confinement, which is what the guy does, probably because he acknowledges that any kind of resistance or non-compliance might mean that him and his family will go hungry for a little while, because, as mentioned before, he's a journalist in a company that publishes mostly pro-Japanese articles, and that's how they remain in business. And one could make the argument that compliance was a power move from him very much, because soon after he gets released, he gets invited to a lecturing tour all around the nation to basically give a bit of a political spiel related to why the Japanese occupation in Korea is actually a good thing. And at that point, he kind of ever so subtly shows a little bit of resistance by saying, like, well, I'm afraid that my Japanese is not that good, so I don't know if this is really a good idea. To which one of the colonial authorities responds that, no, it's okay for you to use your own native tongue, just as long as you just promote our political spiel, and stick to the script. We're not gonna have a problem, so go ahead and speak. Which is exactly what he does, and he agrees to go on this lecturing tour. And apparently he gains a lot of mostly positive type of attention for that, and after one of the lecturing gigs, he gets approached by a small group, and they come up to him at his lodging one night, and in essence they're like, Hey, good evening, sir, sorry to bother you. We were impressed by your lecture. We just wanted to come show our gratitude and invite you to come speak to a group of us in a more private setting. And at this point, he's still kind of on edge, because he even says something along the lines of, like, quote, but the fact that they seem to have no hostility toward me, that they were very polite, and that the two were too small to have come to beat me up, I felt again relieved and disappointed at the same time, unquote. After some consideration, he agrees to go to this meeting by the youth that he gets invited to, and they waste no time before expressing their frustrations between the Japanese censoring the Korean language and forcing people to change their names from a Korean one to a Japanese one, and the forceful draft to the military and other things like that are typical not only to colonial Korea but colonial any nation really throughout history. And at this point I should mention that one of the other main reasons I chose to speak about this this time around was because the topic of colonialism is also a very interesting one, because based on my readings thus far, which, quick disclaimer, I'm far from an expert of, but from a small handful of readings so far, there seems to be a pattern where somehow or another a certain nation just and their people in power got convinced that this territory that we already have, which is often already a hell of a lot, is not enough and it needs to be expanded. And while they're expanding that territory and annexing all these other nations, or a nation, that, maybe needless to say, cannot happen without them getting a little bit physical about it. And once that initial bloodbath is said and done, they'll go on to control people's minds and try to convince them that our occupation here is actually saving your nation, so be grateful. I don't have to mention any kind of concrete examples from history where that happened. After that initial political spiel, they'll often use the land over there to send resources to their sort of main base or their main land, which also may not have been theirs to begin with. And they'll also steal the knowledge of that particular ethnic group whose territory they just annexed and kind of pass it on as their own. From what I've read so far over the fall semester of 2025, the political strife under colonial Korea under Japanese rule was not any different than what I just described. Fortunately, people like the main character of this story eventually kind of ever so slowly started to come around by saying stuff like, quote, we should develop the strength to not be discriminated against. We must reach a level both culturally and economically that does not fall behind them. If we make an effort and use our strength, then how would they dare look down on us? Personally, I feel like this is some really good stuff and one of the most intriguing lines of the whole story, because it just goes to show that, especially in contemporary times, it would be very powerful for more and more people to think like this, because it suggests that if we just stand together and let go of our petty differences and start developing our philosophy, our culture, our local economy, and all of that good stuff together, while keeping in mind who the true enemy is, who in fact is often not your neighbor who keeps on blasting music too loud. In that kind of case, we could develop very much culturally, financially, and deeply spiritually as well, instead of getting divided and conquered. And the main character of Sinner of the People seems to agree with the thoughts I'm sharing with y'all, which is why towards the end of the scene where he's mingling with the youth from the generation after him, he gives them a little speech while kind of being anxious about it being leaked towards the outside, but interestingly, he still doesn't let that slow him down, and he gives this really beautiful speech, which is, quote, As this is a special chance, I have one thing to ask. Please develop and preserve an unyielding spirit. Rather than live a compromised life, obeying the strong and seeking immediate destitute safety, please develop an unyielding spirit to fight against the oppressor without submission, although you are oppressed. That we have been under oppression by a continental nation for thousands of years, and today we have become slaves to Japan, is because we are lacking unyielding spirits to fight against the foreign enemies invading and oppressing us. The compromising attitude which yields to and flatters the strong in order to maintain humiliating temporal safety is a big shortcoming of our national characteristics. Our current misery resulted from this defect of national characteristics, and as long as we do not correct the defect, we will be ruined or will have an unfortunate tomorrow forever, as we have had today. I sincerely hope that more pieces of literature from the Orients become more popular, because they seem to have a lot of intellectuals who have a lot to contribute to literature. Though again, if any of this resonated with you, be sure to get your hands on Sinner of the People by Chemansi. And if you ever happen to enroll into CUNY Queens College, be sure to also check out a course or two by Sijong Kim, who is part of the Department for Eastern Studies at the college. And last but not least, if you've been enjoying these reviews of mine, please be sure to affect the algorithm gods up there with your engagement by the form of subscription, a comment, and if it's not too much of a bother, please do tell your buddies about this as well by way of the quick share button down there as well. And with that, I appreciate you making it all the way to the end of this speech of mine, and I will talk to y'all more in the next one. Take care.